When we turn to, again, this notion of natural law, we would say, by and large, that Judaism does not base its behavior system on the notion of natural law. Interesting, isn't it? We have a different formulation for natural law. Even though we're created in the image of God, it almost sounds like a contradiction, does it? God created man in his image. We're created in the image of God, meaning we have divine qualities, etc. You might think to yourself, well, certainly one of the most immediate things that ought to mean is that we do godly things, that we think in godly ways, that we wouldn't murder another person because that's against God, etc., etc. The fact is, Judaism does not like to rely on the fact that people share a good sense of natural law. We may even argue that there is something to it, but we also argue that you cannot base a society, you cannot have a real community which functions on the notion that people naturally come by natural law. That's Judaism says it. It says natural law, very nice. You know murder is not good, theft is not good. The most basic principles, theft of another person's property, it's good. I'm glad that you know it. And yet, maybe you were born with it and it's in your DNA, and good, and study Torah. And the Torah will define for us what we mean by theft and non-theft. We're going to look at that, by the way, because it has a lot to do with business ethics. Again, summing it up so that, again, we get our hands around this. One of the greatest, most predominating interests of Jewish law, of Torah, is the quantification of behavior. The quantification of behavior. Now look, we don't have the time for this tonight, but at least I'll give you the categories, and you can sign up for one of our courses that the provost, go for it. Think of this as intellectual hors d'oeuvres, all right? Should I put it this way, a notion that all behaviors have to be quantified, or else people really won't know what to do. Now, I will suggest something to you that I think will convey the sense of this quite clearly. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Sounds like the Ten Commandments, so-called Ten Commandments. They're not Ten Commandments, by the way. 10 sayings, right? They call it commandments, we don't. And anyway, there are 13, not 10. So that's for another class. All of this is an advertisement for classes. I want you to know this. This is a fake. All right. Honor thy father and thy mother. All you have in the Torah is that line. Well, there are a couple other lines about parents, but I put them all together. I'm interested in that line. Honor thy father and thy mother. What does that mean? What does it mean? It means, and again, you can do your own test, all right? I invite you to do it. Out there in the population at large, what do you think it means in the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments? Call it the Ten Commandments. You call it Decalogue, you're blessed. The Ten Commandments, honor thy father and mother. What does it mean? I've done it already, you can do it 8 out of 10 times, 7 out of 10 times, love. The love word will get in there, I promise you. And isn't it interesting that the one thing that the entire Torah does not require of us, that is the written Torah and the oral Torah, is that we should love our parents. Which ultimately is a meaningless phrase, you understand. Love, I love you, you love me, love, I don't know. It's like this, I quote from the Talmud. Don't interrupt when your parents are talking to somebody else. That's called imagine our kid. All right. This is not applied halacha right now. It's just I'm doing Talmud with you. Don't interrupt your parents. Don't try to give support to your parents' argument when they're arguing with somebody else. Open the door for your parents and bring them in the house. Give them a comfortable seat. Bring them a pillow and a blanket and put the shoes on the feet, for instance. Bring them a cup of tea. This is in the halacha. Isn't that an interesting thing? Honor thy father and thy mother means behavior, and it means quantified behavior. So that's an example of what is in fact consistent throughout Jewish law, the quantification of behavior. You're going to see how that plays out when we read the actual examples. While I'm talking about law, and while we're talking about ethics, and while we're talking about executive orders that prohibited cut off funds, let's say, to the NIH, some interesting questions come up which which I'll just touch on because, again, my job, remember, is to annoy you, and enlightening but annoying, and that is that there's a lot to be said in the Jewish tradition with respect to the involvement of government in the regulation of human activity. I am not, I swear to you, going to make a political statement. Not that I'm afraid of it because it's a hot thing, but because you would have no idea where I am politically on the basis of what I want to share with you in terms of what the Jewish law says about government involvement. Jewish law does say, predominantly, there are exceptions to everything, but predominantly says that on matters of exquisite, vital interest to human beings, like food, clothing, shelter, health, government has the obligation to involve itself in regulation in order to see that these basic human rights, we don't use the word right, basic human needs, derived from God's will are made available to people, and that we as a community, whatever community is, it could be the Jewish community, it could be the municipality of Cleveland, it could be the Ohio, the country, okay, the community is responsible for seeing to it that it fashions laws which protect people's access to food, clothing, water, health, and security. What you're going to do with that and how this will become part of your formulation in your own minds of your political viewpoints these days, that's up to you. I will talk about it a little bit more, what we do with all this learning that we're doing. But I have to say up front, so that it's clear from the beginning, that the predominating quantity of Jewish thinking about community and about society is that the commune is obligated to provide basic, divinely derived goods on behalf of human beings, Jew and Gentile alike. Okay. This also means that I can't talk about credit default swaps tonight. I would like to do interesting things, or derivatives, those other things that you wonder what they're all about. I may not even be able to talk about Bernie Madoff very much. That's my part of the speech for criminal law. That has nothing to do with Jewish. Happens to be a Jew, but this is crime. This is crime, and it goes beyond anything that the Torah had in mind, to say the least. We are not talking now about crime as much as we wish to talk about what is considered right and proper. Hatov v'hayashar. So we're going to take a look. Say to you, as we are ready to transition, almost ready to transition into looking at some of those Torah passages, that an obligation that every Jew, whatever flavor you are, doesn't matter, an obligation that every serious Jew has is to ask herself the question, what do I think is a just society? Actually, the way I would formulate the question is, what do we think is the just society? Ladies and gentlemen, I offer to you that is a Jewish question. We are bidden as Jews of every flavor to ask that question consistently. What do we think is the just society? We have an obligation to that just society because we are Jews. We have an obligation to that just society because we're the recipients of Torah. And a just society is not going to be able to be based on ethics. Or, as the late Rabbi Leo Beck said in his phenomenal essay on Christianity as romantic religion,